Imagine this. You get your first real paycheck. Not a part-time shift, not a summer job. A real one. With direct deposit and a salary and benefits and the quiet sense that something in your life has officially changed. You look at the number, and even if it's modest, even if it's less than you hoped, something about seeing it lands differently than you expected. It's yours. You earned it. You are now, in a way you weren't before, a person with income. The first thing most people do is spend some of it. Not recklessly, reasonably, on something they've been putting off, on something that feels like a small celebration of arriving, on something that signals, quietly, that they have crossed a threshold. And that moment, that first decision, that first purchase made with real earned money, is more significant than it appears. Not because of the amount, because of what it begins to build. Something that will shape financial behavior far longer and far more deeply than most people realize when they're standing in the middle of it.
There is a conversation about first job finances that happens all the time in America. It usually sounds like this: start your 401k early, build an emergency fund, avoid lifestyle inflation, don't carry a credit card balance. That conversation is not wrong. The advice is real, and the stakes are real. Starting to invest at 22 versus 32 genuinely matters over a lifetime of compounding. But there's a different conversation that almost never happens. One that goes deeper than the mechanics of what to do with the money. One that asks what the money starts to mean. Because in those first years of earning, the years when someone is navigating their 20s, building a social life, figuring out who they are as an adult, watching your peers and measuring themselves against them, money doesn't stay a neutral tool for very long. It becomes something else. It becomes a signal, an identity marker, a way of participating in a world that is suddenly, for the first time, available to participate in. The restaurants you can now afford to try, the clothes that fit the professional version of yourself you're becoming, the apartment that reflects where you are in life, the weekend trips that are now within reach, the version of yourself that money, even modest money, makes possible. None of this is frivolous. Most of it is deeply human. But what happens in those first few years, how the money gets used, what it gets used to fund, what standard of living takes shape, does something more durable than spending down a paycheck. It sets a baseline. And baselines, once established, have a quiet gravity that is very difficult to escape.
Here's what makes this hard to see from the inside. When you're in your first job, spending what you earn doesn't feel like a pattern forming. It feels like living your life. You're not thinking about financial identity. You're thinking about the Friday night plans, the apartment your friend just moved into that seems nicer than yours, the jacket you've been eyeing for 2 months, the concert that only comes around once. These are not financial decisions in the moment they're being made. They are social decisions, personal decisions, decisions about comfort and belonging and the kind of experience you want your days to contain. And they are completely normal. The problem is not that they happen. The problem is what accumulates underneath them, slowly and invisibly, over the first 2 or 3 years of earning. A lifestyle takes shape, not through one dramatic choice, but through hundreds of small ones, each individually defensible, collectively defining. A certain level of dining out becomes normal. A certain quality of clothing becomes the baseline. A certain kind of weekend becomes expected. A certain apartment size stops feeling like a luxury and starts feeling like the minimum acceptable.
There is a quiet but powerful force that operates in the early years of earning. It is not peer pressure in the obvious sense. It is not advertising, exactly, though advertising participates in it. It is something more internal and more durable than either. It is the process by which consumption becomes identity, by which what a person buys and how they live and what their money regularly goes toward gradually becomes how they understand themselves, how they signal to others who they are, how they participate in the social world around them. This is not unique to any income level. It happens at $60,000 a year
and it's $600,000. The categories change. The underlying dynamic does not. In the early earning years, it works like this. Money arrives, possibly for the first time in meaningful amounts. With it comes access to
The standard advice for young earners is well-intentioned and mechanically correct. Save a percentage of every paycheck before you spend. Take the employer match in your 401k. Build 3 to 6 months of expenses as an emergency fund. Avoid high-interest debt. Live below your means. None of this is wrong, but all of it addresses behavior. And behavior, in isolation, is only the surface layer of the problem. Telling someone in their mid-20s to live below their means assumes that their sense of what their life should look like is still flexible, that the baseline hasn't yet calcified, that the identity hasn't yet formed around a particular standard of living. For someone in the first few months of earning, that might still be true. The baseline is fresh, the habits are forming. There is still room to shape things. But for someone who has been earning for 2 or 3 years, who has built a social life around a certain kind of spending, who has established a lifestyle that their peer group mirrors and their daily routine depends on, the advice lands differently. It doesn't feel like a financial suggestion. It feels like a threat to something real. And so it gets intellectually accepted and practically ignored. Not because the person doesn't understand it, but because the financial behavior is no longer just financial. It is personal. It is social. It is wrapped up in how they experience themselves. The advice that doesn't account for that layer, the identity layer, is always going to hit a wall, even when the person hearing it genuinely wants to change.
Let's stay with this a little longer, because there is a second consequence that deserves attention. When consumption becomes identity in the early earning years, it doesn't just affect current spending. It affects every financial decision that follows. Because once a standard of living is established, once a person has a clear internal picture of what their normal looks like, every future financial decision gets evaluated against that picture. A raise doesn't automatically create savings. It creates permission to expand the standard, to upgrade the apartment, to travel more, to finally afford the version of the life that the current version was always pointing toward. A relationship doesn't just combine 2 incomes. It often combines 2 identities built around 2 sets of consumption habits. And the negotiation of that combination is one of the most financially consequential and least discussed events in a person's financial life. A promotion doesn't just mean more money. It means arrival at a social tier that carries its own expectations about where you live, where you eat, what you drive, how you present yourself. Each of these transitions gets filtered through the financial identity established early on. And if that identity is one where money primarily serves lifestyle, where the purpose of earning is to fund a particular quality of experience, then every new source of income flows automatically in that direction. Not through bad judgment, through the momentum of an identity that formed before the person was thinking carefully about what they wanted their relationship with money to actually be. That is the quiet long-term cost of the consumption identity trap. It doesn't feel like a trap when it's forming. It feels like being young, like enjoying what you've earned, like finally living. And it is all of those things. But it is also, quietly and simultaneously, a financial foundation being poured. And foundations, once set, are very hard to alter without significant effort.
Here is the reframe that matters. Most people, looking back at their early earning years, ask one of 2 things. Either, what should I have done differently with the money? Or, why didn't anyone tell me to invest earlier? Both questions are about behavior, about the financial mechanics that could have been applied differently. But the more revealing question is this: what story did I build about what money is for? And is that story still true? Because the story built in the first few years of earning, money is for living, money is for arriving, money is for participating in the life available to you, is not a wrong story. It is just incomplete. And an incomplete story about money tends to fill in its missing pieces automatically, with spending, with consumption,
with the quiet expansion of a lifestyle that always seems to need a little more to feel like enough. The shift is not toward deprivation, it is toward authorship, toward looking honestly at the financial identity that formed, not through deliberate choice, but through the accumulation of ordinary decisions, and asking whether it actually reflects the long-term life a person wants. That question, asked sincerely, has a way of revealing things. Not guilt, not regret, just clarity about where the current path is actually leading.
When the connection between early consumption habits and long-term financial identity becomes visible, something useful tends to shift. The frame stops being about individual decisions, about this purchase or that subscription or this month's dining out total. It starts being about a larger question. What am I actually building with my money? Not this month, over time, across the arc of a working life. And that question, asked without judgment, with genuine curiosity, tends to surface a distinction that most financial advice glosses over. The distinction between money spent on experience and money spent on identity maintenance. Experience is transient. It happens, it passes, it leaves a memory. Its cost is finite. Identity maintenance is ongoing. It requires continuous funding to sustain. And because identity tends to expand, because the standard that felt special eventually feels normal, and normal eventually feels like minimum, the cost of maintaining it rarely stays fixed. This is not an argument against spending on anything meaningful. It is a quiet invitation to understand what the spending is actually doing. Because money used consciously. The first job is a financial beginning. Everyone knows that. What's less obvious is that it's also an identity beginning. The years of early earning are not just years of building a bank balance or a 401k. They are years of building a self, a financial self, a set of habits, expectations, and assumptions about what money is for and what life is supposed to feel like, that follows a person forward for a very long time. That isn't a warning. It's just the truth of how these things tend to work. The person who understands it early has something valuable. Not a formula, not a plan. Just the awareness that the financial decisions of the early years are doing more than spending money. They are answering, quietly and incrementally, one of the most important financial questions a person ever faces. What is money, to me, actually for? Most people never consciously ask that question. They just live the answer their habits chose for them. Sitting with it, even once, even briefly, even without a clear response, is a different kind of start. And different starts, over time, tend to lead somewhere different.